5 things I would never do to my face as a plastic surgeon. Number 1, procedures that promise an incisionless facelift using PDO threads. Number 2, full facial liquid facelift treatments. 3, treatments that promise an incisionless facelift based on energy. So examples of this are RF devices such as Morpheus and Thermage. There's tons of treatments that fall into this category. The next major procedure that I would never do on myself is buccal fat pad reduction. The last treatment I'd like to mention a few things on is the isolated neck lift. Hi, I'm Dr. Raghu Athre. I'm a double board certified facial plastic surgeon specializing in facial rejuvenation. I'm also the inventor of the 4D facelift. I've been doing facial rejuvenation for almost 20 years. So all of this being said, there's a lot of treatments that come in every single day. New treatments are something that device companies and technology companies love to push to the market. This is kind of the fact of our industry. Along with it comes a lot of hype, marketing hype, a lot of Instagram, social media attention. So patients out there are somewhat confused as what works, what doesn't work. And I'd like to say it's not just the patients, it's also me. So a lot of the treatments that I'm talking about here are things that I've actually tried. So when these companies actually come out and tell you, hey, listen, we've got this great new product, as a surgeon, I do think that it is our responsibility to learn about it, find out more about it, and then take it from there. So what has happened in that process is as I learn about these things, first of all, I have the first kind of litmus test. Does this make sense? Okay. Is this something that I think is really going to work? Okay. Number 2, if I passes the initial test, then I start going into, does this thing actually, or does this treatment sound like the risk-benefit ratio is in the favor of the patient? Meaning, whatever the risks associated with the procedure, those need to be outweighed by the potential benefit. Furthermore, when we define benefit, I define benefit as a treatment that beats the gold standard, is very effective, long-lasting, and has low risk. So you have to kind of put all these things together, weigh it out on a scale before you say, is this treatment good, bad, or is it something that I recommend? Most of the procedures on here, lucky for me, I've tried them a few times and gone, oh, okay, I realize that this isn't something that I need to pursue long term. Some of them actually took me longer term to figure out that this isn't something that I think that we should do from a long-term perspective. So let's break down these procedures in more detail. Number 1, procedures that promise an incisionless facelift using PDO threads. Okay. So PDO threads are sutures that essentially have little barbs on them, just like your barbed wire fence. So if you take a look at the barbs, they have one direction. So they easily travel through the tissues in one direction. However, can be pulled in the opposite direction. They create resistance, and thereby you're supposedly supporting the face. So you can pull it back, sew it to deeper structures. But here's the problem with this entire idea. If you think about all these tissues are actually pretty heavy tissues, and you've got muscles that are actually working against these tissues, and that's what's actually pulling them down. Some of the videos out here I've actually shown how you have to separate the ligaments of the face to truly get a good facelift. So is it possible to lift the face simply with these PDO threads? The reality to that answer is no. So I've actually tried this procedure on a patient, and I was severely disappointed with the result that I got in the short term, the result that I got in the long term, and the patient had some problems with puckering and little tiny small suture abscesses. All of this put together, I think this is just not a procedure that I will pursue long-term, believe in, and I just would never do it on myself or any other patient. Number 2, full facial liquid facelift treatments. So as we age, we do lose volume. I do think that there is a very small role for fillers in patients with isolated small areas of volume in deeper structures. Now, if you had spoken to me maybe 15, 17 years ago, I really was using a lot more fillers, not in a liquid facelift style fashion, but I was using more fillers than I use today. The filler companies really came out and gave a lot of information about fillers, that this is an extremely benign treatment and is something that where the filler agents just completely dissolve. Based on all of this, it sounded like a pretty good treatment. What I've learned, especially in the last 10 to 12 years, as I've done more and more facelifts, is that the filler actually hangs out. There's lots of patients where you will actually see where as you're dissecting, you will see some residual filler. And when you talk to the patient about it, they'll tell you they haven't had a filler treatment in 5+ years. Furthermore, when filler is being injected into the tissues, there is some degree of a localized tissue reaction. What do I mean by this? So the filler is not an agent that is completely your own. It is a foreign body material that's being injected into the tissues. So when you do this, what happens is there is some inflammation and the tissues react and cause some degree of minor scarring. This is really visible when you do a facelift and you're trying to dissect, and you'll see that the tissue planes are not as clear as they normally are in a patient who's never had filler. Based on all of this information, what I feel is a better alternative is fat transfer. This is why I have essentially moved my practice to almost 100% fat transfer model, because you can really get real volumization of the face, but with none of the side effects that the fillers would provide. 3, treatments that promise an incisionless facelift based on energy. So examples of this are RF devices such as Morpheus and Thermage. There's tons of treatments that fall into this category. Essentially, all of these devices are passing energy through the skin, trying to heat up the layers beneath the skin. So as we look at the face, we've got the skin, we've got a little bit of fat underneath the skin, and then we have that muscle layer, which we call the SMAS. Now, what these devices claim to do is pass the energy down through the level of the skin, as well as a little bit of that thin layer of fat down into the SMAS layer. And what they're trying to do is create some degree of tissue reaction in the SMAS to truly lift the tissues up. This type of treatment just doesn't work. Furthermore, it actually melts that little layer of fat that separates the skin from the SMAS layer. And 3, causes a lot of scarring between the SMAS and the underlying layers. So many of these companies will promise you amazing results where you see a woman with a very full neck and they said after 3 treatments, you've got this nice, sharp, defined jawline. It's just not going to happen. Long term, those tissues really do not have the structural integrity to hold that form and the sharp definition. If the sharp definition is something that you want, you really need to go for a more surgical solution. Furthermore, these short-term energy fixes kind of almost kick you behind when you try to do a surgical solution due to the fact that they're causing scarring. So therefore, A, the procedure is more difficult, tissue planes are more difficult to dissect, and hence it becomes a more difficult surgery. The next major procedure that I would never do on myself is buccal fat pad reduction. So buccal fat pad reduction was all the rage a few years ago. We saw these we saw these women on Instagram that would have this extremely gaunt, chiseled jawline and who had a buccal fat pad reduction. I too joined the bandwagon of buccal fat pad reduction, and I did several buccal fat pad reductions. Couple of things initially that I noted with the buccal fat pad reduction is as follows. Number 1, I think that many patients do not understand the anatomy of the buccal fat pad. There's a lot of really important structures that are very close to the buccal fat pad. They're branches of the facial nerve, and you're essentially going in from inside the cheek blind, trying to pull out the buccal fat pad. Secondarily, when I look at my patients who've had buccal fat pad reduction and look at them long term, the amount of fat reduction or the sharpening of the jawline and midface is variable. There's not a way that I can predict this patient's going to get a great result, this patient's going to get an okay result. There's a lot of variability in there. I do think, however, there are isolated patients that benefit from a buccal fat pad reduction. When I do a facelift, many times I will encounter the buccal fat pad, and in a patient who is somewhat has a very full face, I will do a little bit of debulking of the buccal fat pad. However, by doing it from the facelift incision, I feel that this is a little safer because I have delineated all of my planes. I'm able to see which level the nerve is in, and the buccal fat pad is really just coming out to see me, and I'm debulking it. When I go from inside the mouth, however, I feel that this is a bit more dangerous because you're just kind of making a little incision and dissecting bluntly and hoping that the buccal fat pad comes out to say hi. So there's a little bit of a blind dissection that you're doing, and I do think that there's a lot of important structures in this area. So from the overall gestalt of the risk ratio and the potential benefit, I'm going to say nay on the buccal fat pad reduction. The last treatment I'd like to mention a few things on is the isolated neck lift. There are a few patients who can potentially get away with doing an isolated neck lift. These patients are young patients who have primarily just fullness of the neck and have very good tone in the midface and jawline. However, they really are a minority. The vast majority of aging patients that come to see me have total facial aging. So the age in the midface, have laxity along the jawline, and laxity in the neck. Some of these patients will come in and say, oh, I just want a neck lift. And that just looks bad. You can get a pretty tight result in the neck, and you're leaving all of this laxity along the jawline and the midface. It's just not a natural looking result. Furthermore, when you do an isolated neck lift, most of the time the incisions are either just underneath the chin or with the occlusion of incisions behind the ear. If there's a significant amount of neck laxity, what I've found is you're actually continuing the incisions to get a smooth redraping. And by the time you look at the end of it, you're basically doing a facelift anyway in order to get a very smooth draping. So, procedures, trends, Instagram, all those people that say, oh, all you need is a neck lift. Very, very, very few people are in that category where they can just get an isolated neck lift. So the sum all to this is that an isolated neck lift in a total facial aging patient really just isn't going to work very well. I really hope that all this information has been very useful to you in terms of how you look at facial aging and facial rejuvenation. I look at this as being able to provide the longest term results in a safe, effective, and reliable manner. This is the reason why I really came up with the 4D facelift, and what it really does is reposition all of the compartments holistically and address volume loss to address all the key critical areas of facial aging to provide for a very harmonious, natural, and long-lasting result. So, if you have any questions about any of our thoughts here, please don't hesitate to give me a little message. If you have information that you want to provide, stick it in the DMs or the comments. If you'd like to be notified of more content like this, please hit the subscribe button or give us a thumbs up. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much. Dr. Raghu Athre, Athre Facial Plastics.